Graham Linehan is a sad, sad man, having destroyed everything good in his life. Now, that might have made me sympathetic towards him, were it not for the fact that said destruction is the direct result of him being an extremely violent bigot. Graham Linehan is not the victim of circumstances of substance abuse or mental health problems. He is an ideologically driven bigot who has allowed his own prejudice to consume him, absolutely destroying his own life in the process. And that's something we can all laugh at, which is why we're here today. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, queermisia, torture, and child abuse. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on social media. Hi there, my name is Thurston, she, her, they, them, and today we're here to talk about Graham Linehan's most recent attempt to destroy what little integrity he had left. Today really is pure schadenfreude, with Linehan lighting the shambling husk of what was already his struggling career on fire, watching as it went hurtling over the cliff. It really is spectacular. So today's story began back in July, when beloved actor David Tennant wore a t-shirt which read, quote, "Leave trans kids alone, you absolute freaks," end quote. This came at a time in which the UK government was forwarding plans to out trans youth to their parents, putting said children at extreme risk of domestic violence and abandonment. At the same time, there is an ongoing refugee crisis inside the US, with families containing trans children quite literally fleeing attempts to eradicate said trans youth in states such as Florida and Texas. These are but two examples of the current global crisis inflicted upon trans people, particularly trans children. It's also worth keeping in mind that David Tennant has a trans child, Wilfred, they, them, meaning this wasn't an abstract for him. Whilst David Tennant has always been supportive of the trans community, Wilfred's very existence means this fight isn't distant, it is personal. This was a father standing up in defense of his own child, along with every other trans child being made to suffer under the current regime. So you can perhaps imagine then just how grotesque it was to see former comedy writer turned full-time conspiracy theorist Graham Linehan respond to David Tennant's t-shirt with, quote, "disgusting, ignorant, reckless," end quote, attacking his support for his own child in defending them from vile bigots. Vile bigots like Graham Linehan. We have of course covered Graham Linehan in the past, most notably how he openly promoted child abuse, specifically the torture of trans youth, as part of an attempt to turn them allo-cis-het, a report he threatened to sue me over. He of course, rather famously, ran off the moment I began to raise money to defend myself in court, since he knew it wasn't a fight he could win. We also cover the time Graham Linehan outed himself as a sexual predator, publicly engaging in image-based sexual abuse by publishing intimate photos of a trans person's genitals without their consent. Graham Linehan is the very embodiment of the disgusting and violent practices used by anti-trans bigots. Yet Linehan's bullshit didn't end there. When Bad Writing Takes called out his post, pointing out Linehan's disgraced status, the former comedy writer fired back, stating that he was, quote, "only disgraced among the ranks of abusive groomers like yourself and Tenant," end quote, clearly forwarding Tennant's support for trans children, including his own child, as proof that he is a sexual predator, a groomer. This is sadly nothing out of the ordinary for Linehan and his ilk. Just last month we saw Kellie-Jay Keen-Minshull, aka the Nazi Whisperer, accusing David Tennant of the very same thing for, get this, wearing a pin in support of the general LGBT+ community. Of course, she was too much of a coward to come out and say it directly, instead insinuating David Tennant was a child predator, luring children in with the promise of puppies. By the way, if you'd like to know more about the Nazi Whisperer stuff, I've got an entire playlist dedicated to the topic. I've also got a playlist of my videos on Linehan, so be sure to give that a watch for more details. Sadly, Graham Linehan seemed to suffer no real consequences in the months following his attacks on David Tennant, yet a recent talk he gave at the Institute of Economic Affairs in London revealed otherwise.
I guess the other interesting thing that happened to me is I just lost my TV agent because I criticised David Tennant, who I only found this out later because I looked at the list of people, independent talent represented, and David Tennant was at the top, and he's making slightly more money than me at the moment, so I had to go.
The word criticising here is doing a lot of heavy lifting. You didn't criticise David Tennant, you called him a groomer for wanting to protect his child from bigoted abusers like yourself. And in case you're wondering, Linehan does allude to Wilfred in his speech.
But the reason I criticised him was because he wore a t-shirt saying, "Leave trans kids alone, you freaks." So I said, there's no such thing as trans kids, which there isn't. It's a disgusting thing to place children outside of normal safeguarding principles by saying that they are trans, or in David Tennant's case, non-binary. I see this as a form of grooming. It's adults imposing a belief system on children that confuses and endangers them.
David Tennant isn't non-binary, Wilfred is. So Linehan is admitting that he went after David for protecting his own child, which is as good as going after the child themselves. Graham Linehan is targeting trans children. That is just a demonstrable fact at this point. We also see Graham Linehan slip in the grooming accusation, albeit in a much less direct manner, bringing us back round to the fact that his TV agent, which he somehow shared with David Tennant, dropped him over this, effectively firing him. Now, the first thing I need to do is add a little disclaimer here. When something good happens, especially for the trans community in the current climate, we can get a little carried away with it, presenting the people behind the decision as universally good. Yet, when I stopped to think about this, the question on my mind was, what took them so long? Like, nothing about Linehan has changed. He's still the same vile little troll he's been for the past half a decade. The only thing that changed is he targeted someone represented by the same agency, someone they didn't want to lose. So, whilst I'm glad it happened, let's not pretend like this is a big win for the agency. They were fine with Linehan's abuse until it threatened to harm their bottom line. So the agency gets no reward for finally doing what they should have done years ago. That said, that doesn't mean we can't revel in Graham Linehan's misfortune. When he goes around accusing innocent people of being groomers for protecting their children from him, that is him fucking around, and his ass getting fired is him finding out. It really could not have happened to a more horrid person, so I am glad Graham Linehan faced some direct consequences for his actions, and I am all here for his sad attempts to recontextualize everything as him being the hero in the story, rather than just a sad man with nothing to his name outside of abusing marginalized people. Speaking of, I find it interesting how, in spite of presenting David Tennant as a child predator, Graham Linehan is so egotistical that he feels the need to present himself as being on equal footing, at least financially, claiming that David Tennant, one of the most beloved actors in existence today, with fan bases spanning multiple fandoms, is making slightly more money than me at the moment, with no hint of sarcasm in his voice. That is such flagrant bullshit. The fact that Linehan would even attempt to trivialize the disparity between them with slightly is all the proof needed to show just how much the past few years have bruised his ego. That beneath the surface, he is seething at his growing obsolescence. Because, truly, what of notice has Linehan done since he wrote The IT Crowd in 2006? That's almost 20 years ago. 2 decades. I can't think of a single thing. His entire career was already on the rocks, going nowhere, before he began attacking trans people and defaming beloved actors. And since then, his career has completely imploded, a fact seen in how Linehan, a TV writer, no longer has a TV agent because he couldn't stop targeting trans people and our allies. Just think about that for a second and bask in that sweet, sweet schadenfreude. Yet it gets even more embarrassing. You see, Graham Linehan was married to Helen Serafinovich for 16 years before their marriage came to an abrupt end in 2020. Now, at the time, we, the general public, didn't have confirmation on what went down. Linehan made a couple of comments implying that their split was related to his bigotry, but that was all we had to go on. That fact changed on the 29th of September. In an article Linehan wrote for the Daily Mail, that's the very same Daily Mail he correctly identified as fascist in 2016, Linehan acknowledges that his now ex-wife gave him an ultimatum: his bigotry or his family. Graham Linehan chose his bigotry, leading her to divorce him and take the children. Graham Linehan threw away his own children just so that he could continue to torment and abuse the children of others, like Wilfred. Again, just another example of the sad little man Graham Linehan has become. Now, I still have a lot more to say, especially regarding the science on gender-affirming care, but I think it would be better to put that in its own video. With that noted, what do you think? Can Graham Linehan sink any lower than he already has? Should David Tennant sue him for defamation? Will Graham Linehan find another agent? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Gert Van Vorst, Hannah Banghart, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.